guys and gals, Nary here from Drake Wing Gaming. If some of you know me on Twitter, the Gaming Dragon, today I'm coming back at you another Let's Play episode of Kingsguard. So, y'all, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right back into it, shall we? Alarm chain, you are up, and let's go, girl. Alright. None entered the bay without inspection first, unless they planned to force their way through, which would likely mean certain death, even for the most skilled seafarer. Where are you guys? So many days had passed since you last heard from your aunt and uncle. They sent out a letter a month back telling you of their return from a long excursion across Torvare, and how they would be arriving before your birthday. They were the only two members of your family you had hoped would have made it to your celebration. They were far from conceited or selfish as your other relatives. Had it not been for your lineage to the crown, you likely would have sailed off with them long, long ago. But as the days leading up to your birthday passed, you became increasingly worried. I suppose there is always next year. You retreated back inside and took your time getting dressed. You went back over to your bedside table and lifted a silver crown, turning it around in your hand before placing it back down. As a kid, you were excited to wear that crown. Every day you'd parade the halls, proud and happy as can be with that thing upon your head. For some reason, you felt as though it lost its luster and charm, or maybe it just never was that special to begin with. Sire, I've come to let you know that it is far past rising time. Breakfast is already prepared, and your father is awaiting your arrival. Very few ever came to fetch you from your room unless your father requested it. You grimaced a little. Your stomach still ached from last night. The last thing you needed was to add it onto the turmoil that was going on inside. Knowing your father, he probably would scold you for not finishing everything on the plate. Are you awake, sire? Yeah. The steps eventually recede from the door and you head out, yawning. That's beautiful. Had it been any other day, the smells that wafted through the dining room would have made your mouth water. Today it only churned your gut even more. Your father was nose deep in the paper and didn't seem to have noticed you. On the cover was a story about some kind of religious turmoil in Brennigan, the capital of Brom. You sat yourself on the opposite end of the table from your father and half expected him to say something. Instead, he just ruffled his paper and flipped to a new page. You reached for a goblet of water and slowly sipped the stall for as long as possible. Sipped to stall for as long as possible. Somehow you knew he was waiting for you to say the first word. Probably something about being sorry for being so late, or about last night's incident with Angela. Your Majesty, the first course. A plate of food filled to the rim was placed before you. You spit out the water you were drinking, and thankfully most of it landed in the goblet. The thought of having more than one course was enough to make you throw up. Learn to keep your food in your mouth. I'm sure it must have taught you better. Y'all tell me what kind of accent you want the king to do. He kept his face still hidden behind the paper as he spoke. One of the servants handed you a napkin and you wiped the water from your chin and clothes. Before you could reply, he went on. And late again to a meal. At least he didn't bring up... And did you really think there would be no repercussions to your actions with Lord Bennet's daughter? Hey, she just kept on drinking. I told her she didn't have to. Your father put down his paper and glared at you. Do not try to pin this on her. I know you had a hand in her actions. You've not only embarrassed me, but also her family in front of everyone. I had to apologize graciously for your blunder. You sighed and rested your elbows on the table, one hand holding up your head and the other held a fork that you began to stab and swirl the food on the plate. And another thing. Leandros told me of your little game of hounds and muggers with him. You know how dangerous it is out there and you still refuse to listen to reason. I can't help it if you keep me locked in all the damn time. When will you stop treating me like some bird in a cage? Around the time you learn to listen to your elders and grow up. The dining room hall was opened once more and another guest arrived. You turned to see who gave you the honor of ruining such a joyful breakfast with your dearest father. Oh. The fox moved in great strides. He was practically running. He looked exhausted, as though he had come all the way from the city gates just to get here. He took to your father's side and whispered into his ear. You were too far away to make out anything as they talked in hushed tones. Your father's eyes went wide for a second. He looked anxious or perhaps even frightened. With him, it was always hard to tell, but you knew it was likely some troublesome news. 1 second, y'all. Water time. Gonna be smoothie time after this video. Your talk was brief and Kashiro was already heading out. Your father began to excuse himself from the table. We'll talk more later. Despite the look on his face, he still had the composure to neatly fold his paper and push it in his own chair. And remove your elbows from the table. He left the room at a brisk pace, leaving you alone with the servants. Sire, your food is going to get cold. Your plate was still full, having been relatively untouched, but to be honest, you weren't feeling very hungry. It only took a few bites before you had enough. Sure, you would regret it later with a grumbling and pained belly, but with being Prince, a quick snack was just a servant's call away. You thanked the chef for the meal and asked for it to be delivered to the less fortunate on the streets, though you doubted they would do that and likely toss it in the away. You were back on track to the monotony of your daily life. Your teacher, Master Corello, was a dutiful scholar and scribe for the crown. He was a kind old man whose knowledge far exceeded your own and was the one who also taught your father and your grandfather. To you, his wisdom was unbound, but even though you looked up to him, he was one of the harshest mentors you had. Even with how busy he was in preparing for the upcoming coronation, he still found time to hammer in lessons, and today was just as arduous. I know that you are busy, but that is no excuse to skirt your lessons. I hope you have been reading those books I asked you to. You groaned. Hours of your day were spent under this brutal tutelage. At times he was more fierce than your father. Corello had a tendency to overwork your mind more than even Leandros did with swordplay lessons. It was just over a week ago that he gave you 10 books to read and memorize. Had you not already been an avid reader, it would likely have been an impossible task, but that didn't make it any less daunting. Today his lessons seemed to be even more tedious than before. Every other word he said became lost in your head. The diagrams in the books opened before you, played out epic fights on their pages, and you found your notes filled with drawings of whatever popped into your head rather than on what to memorize. Jake, you better not be daydreaming there. Your eyes shot open and you scrambled to cover up a small sketch in the corner of your notes. No, I'm awake. Are you now? You brought a hand over your mouth and slightly covered a yawn. As you should have read, at least I hope, approximately 30 battles took place across Torvair during the Third Era. Halfway through the war, Farharan had managed to take over and assimilate the nations of Sion and Keskel, both not known for their prowess in war. Brahm, or at the time Bregand, forced the nations Isil and Wadria into submission. With the damage they had taken, their rulers were given a chance to join and fight with the Brigand, or die. They accepted, of course, taking into account the safety of their citizens, but at the cost of losing their nationality and becoming Brahma civilians, with rights above those of slaves but less than the natives. And lastly, here in Yasan, Dominia requested asylum as their nation was soon to be a battlefield between Farharan and Brahm. But as soon as the war was over, Dominia was forced to give up their name and banner and join Yasan. Yes, good to know that you have been reading. Torvair went from having 8 nations to 3, even after the war ended. The hardships of the world were just starting, even with the gods promising peace and prosperity from then on. Because of the war, many of the inventions, technology, knowledge, and history of the nations was lost, as if we had to start from the ground up. It was a long war, and most of the battles that took place were never recorded. It was only the final battle in the Canyon of Death that was documented, and even then, we only have scraps to piece together what happened. But most excerpts from that era appear to hail one man as the hero of the world, despite the war ending with the gods' intervention. Alexander Belisarius, right? He was the general leading more than half of Brahm's forces against Farharan. The books you gave painted him as a corrupt general, though. There are 2 sides to every coin. Many know of Alexander and his feats and deeds. He has songs and statues praising him, while others depicted him as a wicked being. There is no denying that he was a master tactician, though. Even Leandros has studied his strategies. Whether or not he was considered evil for commanding his troops and slaughtering thousands is a question of morality. At the time, he simply obeyed his orders from the King of Bregan. One second, y'all. Water time. Oh, yeah. It was a time of war, for lack of a better word to say of the horrors during that era. All nations fought with the same underhanded tactics to pointing fingers, so pointing fingers as to who was more cruel is meaningless. If anyone was to be considered the villain of this war, it would have been King Silas of Brigand. The war likely would have still started, with tensions between humans and beastmen becoming alarmingly unstable due to inequality, but perhaps not as soon or as ferociously were it not for the king's initial attack. Now, as far as the tales go, Alexander is the only individual that most seem to take note as he fought against Farharan during the battle in the Valley of Death. But on the other side, we had someone equally as important to the war. A beastman general led the Farharan forces, but he is very rarely mentioned in the history books. He too had many notable accomplishments, but being that he was a beastman and from Farharan, not many wrote about him, seeing as most writers at the time were humans. That, and the lasting stigma of the war, kept many from wanting to glorify him. It also didn't help that most Farharans weren't as literate as they are today because of slavery. Tell me, Jake, are you able to tell me what this beastman's name was? What was this beastman's name who led Farharan's forces against the Brahmish at the Valley of Death? Gustavus Drake, Doran the Breaker, Mikhail of Dunafort, Edmund the Valorious. Okay. I like this one. Oh shit, right? Correct. Oh, it brings a smile to my face for you to answer that correctly when so many scholars back at the Academy know not his name. But you're not smiling. On the inside, Jake. On the inside. For you to know that, though, you must have read beyond what I have assigned. His name is only mentioned in a single book about the war. Wield Grayson's Last Drop of Blood. So you've even gone so far to have read that one. I must say, if it wasn't you we were talking about, I would have been surprised to know you even heard of that hidden gem. It was always difficult back at the Academy to get any of my students to read it. Most of the professors seemed to deny its existence as well. The nerve of them, and they called themselves academics. I really enjoyed it myself. Out of all the books, it was the only one to attempt to have an objective view on the war. The level of detail was astonishing. A beastman wrote it, correct? Yes. I had the pleasure of meeting with Mr. Grayson many years ago. It is a shame that many of the books he wrote were burned by maniacs declaring his works as heresy. Thankfully, many historians saw the value of the knowledge contained inside and hid as many of them as they could. But, if you have read his book, then let me test your memory once more. Getting back onto the trail, can you tell me what species of animal Doran was likened to? Alright, I guess we're saving it here again. More quizzes? Corello simply leered. What was Doran the Breaker's species? I don't know what kind of lizard folk are in this game. I mean, not lizard folk. I don't know what kind of beast folk are in this game. I was gonna say lizard, but he was a lion. I must say that is quite the guess. What made you choose that? Well, as far as I read, no one has come to a consensus as to which species he might have been, but we have been able to settle upon a select few. I just chose the first one off the top of my head that I read about last. A perfect response. It is true, we still haven't discovered just what he could have been, but we have been able to rule out a sizable number of animals. Oh, if only you weren't tied down to being king, I would drag you back to Azite Academy and put that mind to better use. Just think of all the hours you could dedicate to study without having to worry over ruling a kingdom and such. It sounded like an interesting offer until you used hours and study in the same sentence. The day continued to drag on long after Corello's lessons. You struggled to keep your eyes open and you wanted to rest, but your duties dragged you on by the leash. Despite how busy you were, you expected your father to check up on you, but not once did he appear. Even the servants didn't have a clue where he had vanished to. Still, it was nice to spend a few hours away from him. Although you were glad that he was absent, it also meant that you had to pick up his work before it piled up. When you were younger, it was the worst sort of torture. Stacks of papers at his desk needed to be read, signed, and stamped with a signia, and that was only the beginning. After sitting in his study for an hour, or even up to half a day, then you had to meet in the throne room for the hearing. There, you were made to listen to the demands of the people and give the right course of advice or action to resolve issues. One by one, you moved down the list as commoners, lords, or barons would arrive and clamor over their problems with the utmost exaggeration. With how fervent their concerns were, you'd have thought the world was soon to end should their demands not be met within a reasonable time. Some issues were quite serious and took the collective minds of your court to resolve. Other times they were about petty problems that made you roll your eyes so far back you could see your brain. Since when was a missing cow an urgent matter that required your presence? Very well, I shall send a soldier to look over the matter. Oh, thank you! Thank you! My Sarah means so much to me! The farmer got down on his knees and put his hands together as though in prayer. I assume that is all? The man looked up and nodded. He tried to take a step forward, but several guards stood in his way, likely taking it as a threat. When she comes back, you must try her milk. I swear to you that it is the best in the land. We'll see about that. The man was guided out, uttering more praise as he left the building while you slink deep into the throne from exhaustion. Finally. Oh, my ears are about to fall off. You groaned at the prospect of more non-essential issues. They walked in with grace befitting of one of nobility, and a grin spread across your face as you looked up and recognized them. Aunt Marilyn! Uncle Esther! They gave their most careful and courteous bow. I do hope you have the time to see us. I always have time to see my favorite family members. Are you sure? I imagine you must be tired from all of your work today. Just seeing the two of you has me feeling refreshed already. You leapt out of your chair and bounded down to the stairs to properly greet them, giving each of them a long and warm embrace. Ouch! As you let go, Esther had tugged on your ear. Hey, what was that for? Just checking that your ears are still intact. Wouldn't want them falling off now, would we? I have needles and plenty of string to sew it back on. You took a few steps back. Ah, no, they're just fine. Really now? Because I think I see a little tear. That's just your imagination. Looks like everything is still in its place. You sighed a breath of relief. Well, now that we know that your ears are in working order, we have so many things to tell you about our trip. As do I. What happened? When did the two of you arrive? You were so late from what your letter said that I was afraid of what fate might have befallen you. We moored into the harbor a little over an hour ago. It took some time to pass through the sea gate. Our ship was almost too big to squeeze through the passage. I heard it's the biggest ship ever built. I've been anxious to see it for myself. That it is. The Syracusia. We'll be sure to give you the grand tour. As for what happened, we ran into some trouble at sea. Were you caught in a storm? Oh, far worse. A terrible sea monster rose out of the water and attacked us. A sea monster? What, like a giant octopus? Sounds cool. Alright, y'all, I'm going to pause it right there. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring that notification bell, leave a super thanks, or a tip if you can, it always helps. Until the next video, I love you all. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!